Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for attending the online presentation and the Q&A session tonight. So again, I'm Denise Marshall. I'm with Northumberland County. So we're really happy to be able to come and present where we're at with the project with the community. As many of you might know, it has been a fairly long EA process, environmental assessment process, and the environmental assessment was approved by the minister in 2017 to construct a new bridge at the location of 2nd and Alma Street. Since 2017, we developed an RFP to retain consultants in order to start the detailed design process for this new bridge and arterial road network. So in early 2019, we retained GHD, and so they have been on board for the last year, and we have been very busy in that time. There's been a number of studies underway in order to move forward with our design, and you may have seen some of our field staff out and about doing various types of field work, which Brian will get into in the presentation. But at this point, we have reached a 30% or sort of a conceptual design stage that we are now ready to share with the public and to get your feedback and comments and answer any questions you might have. We've been doing quite a bit of consultation up to this point with agencies and some other stakeholders. So this is just extending that consultation process, and it will continue throughout the duration of the project. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Brian to go through the presentation, and so we look forward to all your comments and feedback at the end of the presentation.
Thanks, Denise, and welcome everyone. Glad you could take time out of your busy schedules to join us tonight. As Denise and Katrina mentioned, we're going to go through a bit of a presentation and outline some of the material you can find on the website. Real key here is we really do want to get your feedback and hear some reaction to what we're going to show you. For those of you that did participate in the session a couple of weeks ago, it's going to be very similar. We have modified the presentation a little bit to address some of the comments that we received during the first session, particularly with respect to accessibility and pedestrian movement. So we'll get to that as we move through. So as Denise mentioned, and Katrina did as well, is that it's easy to focus and think of this as just the bridge. And you know, let's not first, the bridge is the center point. It's the focal point of this. It's something that is pretty exciting for us at GHC to get a chance to work on, because you know, not many projects that we work on have the you know, the ability to change it for generations to come. So it's very exciting and challenging at the same time, because that means that we really need to work together to make sure that we end up with something that we're all proud of at the end. The key to this here is that, as you mentioned, the bridge is a focal point, but a bridge only works if you have a good road network feeding it. So the project is, as we talked about, an arterial road network, and you can see on the screen that there is work both east and west of the Trent River to make the access to the new bridge functional and safe. Denise talked a little bit about this before. This project, as projects of this magnitude, are all the same across Ontario now. So they take a long time. A lot of times people, you know, get anxious and say, well, when are you doing it? When are you doing it? Or don't do it, whatever the case may be. So it goes back to, you know, the late 80s, and even before that, there were discussions about, you know, what happens when the bridge, the existing bridge, needs to be replaced or fixed, and it's already very busy, as everyone on the call knows that. So there are a lot of pre-studies that were done up until 2007, and then the EA was approved in 2017, and now we've entered the final design phase. So it's important to, I think, appreciate what is possible with respect to feedback now. The EA having been approved by the province means that the bridge is going to happen sometime. And the bridge is going to happen in the location that the EA identified that it's going to happen within a couple of meters one way or the other. So the ability to say, you know, you can still not agree with the bridge necessarily, but the fact is it's still, it is approved and it will happen at some point in time. When an EA is sent to the Ministry of Environment for review and approval, it often comes back with commitments that the proponent, in this case the county, has to address as the project continues to unfold. Now, for a project that had this amount of interest and this amount of controversy, and sometimes, the EA commitments were fairly straightforward. One was talking about road salt management, and we see that more and more. Road salt is something that we're looking at addressing all across the province because of its potential impacts to the environment. Every new bridge and significant roadway that we're working on, the next point about cycling lanes and pedestrian facilities is something that is being discussed in every instance. And in most cases, all new infrastructure that's going to last, because a bridge like this will last for 75 years as a minimum after its construction. So even if you don't have the demand for this type of accommodation, the road network and the bridge is not just for cars and trucks. It's for people and for people in mobility. So we talk more about mobility than vehicles. And so what we've tried to do with the design is make sure that all users of the corridor are addressed, not just cars, trucks, fire trucks, and whatnot. It's also, people walking their dogs and people on bicycles, whether you're a commuter cyclist or whether you're a recreational cyclist. So all of that gets factored into the plan. And the last two are very simple, is the final design will be posted on the website, which would happen regardless. And then the final design and the consultation record, which is a very important part of what we're doing, and that's part of what tonight is all about, is that gets submitted as well to ensure that we actually have consulted with people and not just heard you, but actually reacted to what you said. Denise was talking about this. There's a lot of work that you may or may not have observed. Survey work was one of the first things that was undertaken. Some confirmation of traffic work that happened during the EA. And has been updated for the detailed design, and a number of environmental specialty areas in terms of terrestrial, fish, archaeology, those kinds of things. Most of that has been complete. There's still some archaeological work that needs to be undertaken, potentially even an underwater archaeological study, and we're still working through the details of that. One of the first things that a design firm like ours does when we are selected for something like this is look at the design that was previously approved and look at ways to identify improvements if possible. And a lot of that comes out as a nature of not saying that the work that was done before was incorrect, but when we have additional information like survey work and some other things, it gives us the ability to look more deeply and more accurately into some other alternatives. Propose the cross sections for the roads and bridge. You'll see more about that later. There has been a lot of consultation with agencies already, particularly with Trent Hills, and they've been fabulous. And their input is invaluable to hear what the community is thinking and feeling. And Parks Canada as well, because they are the custodian of the Trent River in this area, and part of the heritage network and all of that with the Trent Canal system. One of the things we'll talk a little bit about in the presentation as well is the EA. And the EA had identified property requirements. The nature of a project of this type in an urban area is that you can't construct something like this without having some impacts to property. And so the EA identified a number of different things, some homes that were slated for full buyouts, and some homes and businesses where there's just a partial taking of or partial requirement purchase of property to construct the works. During the revisions, we were able to actually, one of the things that we always strive to do is how do we make that as minimal as possible, while still maintaining the facility to all the standards that it needs to do. So we've been able to reduce the property requirements fairly significantly. So what's changed from the EA? A lot of you may have participated and been aware of what the plan was. At Grand Road and at the west end of the bridge, the original proposal was for a signalized intersection, so a set of traffic signals and a left turn lane, various turn lanes in that location. During the environmental assessment, a roundabout had been explored. Since that time, I have to tell you that roundabouts, I've been doing this for a long time in Ontario and elsewhere. And 10, 15 years ago, the question you would get from people in agency is, why a roundabout? And now, many years later, after many successful implementations of roundabouts, it's, why not a roundabout? And we have able to revise the design that was done in the environmental assessment and propose a modern roundabout at the location instead, which gets rid of the need for traffic signals. And I'll talk more about the benefits of roundabouts compared to signals in a few minutes. Frank Street, located just on the east side of the new crossing, was identified as a closure from 2nd Street with a cul-de-sac, so a turnaround. It would be so there's no access there. We have looked at a few options of doing something a little bit differently there, and one of the options that we came up with was a shared, excuse me, one-way laneway on Frank Street. Now, during the first session, we heard some feedback from some of the residents, and so there will be ongoing discussions with them to see, whether other options may be suitable or not. So that's something that's still to come following the closure of this round of the consultation. A few of the intersections, both at the east and west ends, it's very tight in Campbellford, as it is in many long developed communities. So the sight lines at some of the intersections are not what we would like to see. So in a few areas, we've identified what we call sight triangles. So when you get up to an intersection, you can actually look left and right and easily see approaching vehicles and pedestrians. The one thing that we have been able to do as well is shorten the bridge on the east side. Bridges are constructed of several spans with piers, and the two things at the ends are called abutments, and they support the ends of the bridge, and in the middle they're supported by piers. So we were able to eliminate the east span, which made the bridge shorter, and it eliminated an area under a bridge that may attract some undesirable elements. And we're trying to make this a very safe and attractive facility. So that's, we believe, quite a significant advantage. We have, I mentioned earlier about the EA commitment about the active transportation facilities, we call them. So we have added bike lanes and pedestrian walkways on both sides of the road and the new bridge, and you'll see cross sections of that as well. So if we get into the conceptual design, this is what the bridge looks like. This is a combination of artistic renderings and actual on-ground features. So it gives you a pretty good idea of what it might look like, or what it's likely to look like. Key features that you're seeing in this particular shot are, of course, the roundabout at Grand Road, the bridge, which is the centerpiece of the project. To your left, that big parking lot is Canadian Tire, and just to the south of there is Tim Hortons, and I'm sure most of you already know that. So on the west side, as I mentioned earlier, this is a material change from what was approved in the EA. The environmental assessment looked at a roundabout, but didn't, it sort of held the west side of the Trent River bank, and didn't intrude into the water very much. Now, we have talked to Parks Canada about putting some rock fill in there, which is actually creating some fish habitat, which is a very beneficial thing. And by doing that, we were able to move the roundabout slightly to the east. And that has allowed us to, if you see in the top corner here, there's an existing home here and so on to the north. The EA roundabout required the removal of 4 homes on this side. And our proposal is only requiring this one house on the corner. Impacts to Canadian Tire are virtually minimal. We are proposing a single lane roundabout with pedestrian crossings, and an interesting feature, these are lookouts, benches to look out onto the river. There is a pathway, so those of you that are walking along the west side and enjoying a nice leisurely stroll along there, or a bike ride or whatever, and come to the new bridge, we have a pathway that goes down and under the bridge and then up the other side. So there's no need to actually cross traffic if you're continuing just north-south. If you wanted to cross the east-west, there are crossings at all of the quadrants. And I'll talk a little bit more about pedestrian safety crossing and roundabouts a little later, because it was an issue that was brought up during the last session. On the east side, this is Saskatoon Avenue. So we actually, the old bridge sort of went as far as here and required Saskatoon to move slightly to the west. We have able to maintain Saskatoon Avenue in its exact same location, but eliminated this, what we call the east span. So that's actually shortened the bridge. It actually will save a little bit of money. Frank Street here, I mentioned earlier, there was a cul-de-sac, which is a round bubble that allows vehicles to turn around, like snow plows and garbage trucks and whatever, the recycling truck, whatever vehicles are down there that come around enough to turn around. So they can't turn around in a street this narrow, so you need to provide something for them. This shared use laneway, as we were calling it, is a connection between Saskatoon and Frank Street. It is only one direction, and it is narrower than a roadway. So it only goes in the easterly direction and then northerly on Frank Street. So that was the proposal that we had put forward before. Pretty pictures are always nice, and we have engaged, because this is a very important, aesthetics is a very important part of this project, and as is, of course, the maintaining the heritage, the culture of the town, which is very impressive and enviable to many communities. So we've engaged a landscape architect and a bridge architect to help us to make sure that what is constructed fits the landscape properly. And the firm that we picked has done a lot of work up in Ottawa and done some really impressive work on some of the crossings of the Rideau River in Ottawa as well. So we're borrowing some of those ideas. One of the things that's really a neat feature that we believe, if you look at this top left one here, is that, and we have another view of the cross section, but this is what it'll look like crossing the bridge. So there's a lane of traffic in each way, a bike lane on the roadway in each direction, and then a concrete barrier wall to protect vehicles and pedestrians. So we have to protect vehicles if something happens from leaving the bridge and ending up in the river. So this barrier wall does that. It protects vehicles from leaving the roadway. But the additional benefit is it really provides additional protection for pedestrians who are crossing the bridge as well, because they are protected from vehicles by this crash barrier on this side. That allows us to do something really quite innovative with the railing here that prevents people from going over the side of people and cyclists, but it allows us to make that much more open. So one of the beautiful features of this is the views. And so this allows really excellent views all along the bridge on both sides. It's a mirror image on the same side. This this rendering on the top right is the Frank Street laneway, and it's showing different people using it. It would be a single lane operation for cars, vehicles coming eastbound. We have allowed a strip of buffering here so that we can plant some landscaping that will sort of integrate this retaining wall more into the landscape. And this is a view, it's a potential parkette that's on, this is Saskatoon right here. So if you're looking towards the east here, so there's an opportunity, there's a couple of homes here that have to be removed because they're just too close to the current bridge and the road network. So it provides an opportunity to provide potentially a parkette. And an aerial view, and I think we have a better one of the bridge here, again, shows the two lanes, one lane in each direction, and the bike lanes and the pedestrian and whatnot, and the lighting. This shows it a little bit better. One of the things that we're really looking for feedback on is aesthetic features. There's a number of different options that we've investigated. These both have been used in Ontario before. And one of the things we want to make sure when we construct something like this, earlier I mentioned that the bridges last 75 years. Well, they don't last 75 years without maintenance. But what we don't want to do is construct something that requires a lot of maintenance or looks good the first year and then looks lousy afterwards. So all of the materials that are selected for railing types and things of that nature are very durable, rust-free, that kind of thing. So something that doesn't require any more maintenance than the bridge deck would normally require. And typically they have to be fixed up every 25 years or so, depending on usage and other things. So proposed road improvements in the roundabout. So I talked about the one-way laneway from Frank Street in Saskatoon. There are a number of intersection modifications that are required to make the road network work a little bit more effectively. On-street bicycle lanes are being added along Alma, 2nd and Coburn. Shared use bicycle markings along Simpson. There just isn't enough room to provide separate facility there. And then sort of the biggest new feature is the new roundabout at Alma and Grand Road. Another view of the Frank Street improvements. This is looking from the east towards the west. This is the laneway that we showed earlier. The other options that are possible is a cul-de-sac, but they tend to be fairly large in order to make a vehicle turn. So it has other property impacts. But this is something that we've committed to following up with the residents on Frank Street to have further discussions as we move forward. Right at the very west end of the project at Bridge Street and Simpson, this is one of the areas where there had not been a property requirement identified in the environmental assessment. However, in order to make this intersection work properly for larger vehicles, we have had to pull this faint line here is where the existing curb is, and we need to pull that back so that vehicles can turn without having to enter the far lane. So if someone's waiting to make a turn here or go straight, we want vehicles that are turning right not to interfere with those. So we do have a little property requirement here to address that. The intersection at Alma and Simpson was also one that really wasn't addressed as well as maybe it could have in the EA in terms of how do you get vehicles, particularly larger vehicles like a school bus or a fire truck or a truck, how do vehicles that may be coming this way, how do they turn, particularly if you get two of them arriving at the same time? The current intersection could not accommodate that. So what we've done is we've flared out the southbound piece and provided a little island here so that this vehicle can turn this way and these vehicles can turn this way and they don't conflict with each other. So that's what's happening there. The other area where there hadn't been a property requirement is at the far east end of the project, and that's at Coburn and Center Street, where similar things where we have to pull a curb line back here for the same reason that we do at the other end, and provide what we call those sight triangles. So this allows you to actually see more readily up and down the road, so it makes it safer to make your movements. We talked earlier about what the road improvements would look like, and I'd rather call it a corridor improvement, a mobility thing, because it isn't just for the vehicles, it's just for cars and trucks. And that's quite a departure from how we used to plan roads 10, 15, 20 years ago, where it was let's make sure the cars and trucks can work, and let's hope the pedestrians can find their way through. Now it's a very different approach to planning, where it's all integrated. And you can see here that this is we have a single lane in each direction for vehicles, but then we have on-road bike facilities for commuter bikes, and then we have sidewalks on the one side as well on Simpson Street. On Alma, similar design where we have the on-road bike facilities, and then a meter and a half sidewalk, so it's about a 6-foot sidewalk. These sidewalks are wide enough so that if two people in wheelchairs are approaching, they can both pass each other without having to enter onto the boulevard or do something else. On 2nd Street in Coburn, we have the ability to have sidewalks on both sides, and we have on-road bike lanes, and we have again the one lane in each direction for vehicles, and then the boulevards to pull the sidewalks a little bit further from the road, which is makes it a little more pleasant for people for walking, and also gives us somewhere to put the snow in the wintertime. Proposed roundabout, and I'll move on to the next slide. You've seen this slide before. As I mentioned earlier, there's been a real change in approach in Ontario and the rest of North America in the last 10 to 15 years of roundabouts. And a lot of it has come from from familiarity, quite frankly. You know, when anything is new, people are a little afraid of it potentially because, you know, I'm not sure how to drive that. I'm not sure if others know how to drive that. How do I walk through it? How do I cycle through it? You know, but the reality is what we're seeing is that yes, those initial fears may be somewhat founded, but as you see more of them, they really are fairly easy to figure out. And the reason they're becoming so popular is quite frankly because they are a lot safer than a signalized intersection. Signalized intersections, people think, you know, often that you know, if you throw up a set of traffic signals and all your safety issues go away, that's not the case in many areas because you still have the ability to have some high speed collisions. And you know, a lot of the people on the call may be drivers, and we've probably all experienced some near misses where you're not quite sure if you're waiting to turn left at a signal, is that driver going to stop on the yellow light or on the almost red light, or are they going to come through? And many of the serious accidents that happen at signalized intersections are exactly those turning type maneuvers, and they happen at high speed. And when they happen at high speed, you get injuries and unfortunately fatalities at times. Roundabouts virtually eliminate that. They really control speeds because you simply cannot navigate through a roundabout quickly. Its operating speed is usually about 15 kilometers an hour or so. So it by virtue, you know, by nature, it slows traffic down. And you know, a lot of times in an entryway to a community where people have been driving along a provincial highway or a county road and driving at high speeds, this actually tells people that their driving pattern and community has changed. So it really encourages drivers to actually change their driving behavior. There's a lot of stats that are out there. I talked a little bit about this, the traffic calming effects. But if you look at the second bullet, is the real critical one in my nature, is that injury collisions are reduced 75% and fatals by 90%. We'd love to see that at 100%. You know, all of us would like to see that, all of those numbers at zero. You know, we want no fatal act, we want no collisions, but the reality is they happen sometimes. So can we do something to mitigate their impacts? That's really what this is all about. The other benefit is not just safety, but traffic flow. Again, appealing to the drivers out there, have you ever come up to a signalized intersection in off-peak hours and you come to a red light and there's nobody coming the other direction and you're waiting and you're wondering, well, why am I stopped here? Well, roundabout, you don't have to stop. You only stop if there's vehicles in the roundabout. If there aren't, you're free to go. So, but by virtue of that, you get reduced emissions and decreased fuel consumption. That's a good thing for all of us, you know, as we're trying to green up our planet. So active transportation roundabout, this is one of the most challenging ones that people sort of get the misunderstanding that roundabouts are more difficult for pedestrians and cyclists. And in fact, the reality just doesn't prove that out. It's true that it may take a bit of getting used to, but we'll show you a couple of things that we've added since last time about how people navigate that. And it really is very simple because a pedestrian actually then only has to cross a single lane of traffic at a time. At a signalized intersection, you're crossing typically 3 lanes. There's a turn lane and the 2 through lanes, and you do need to make eye contact with the driver because if you're crossing, are they actually stopping at the red light? Are they yielding to you? A roundabout facilitates a lot of those things. There's still, you know, the need to communicate verbally with drivers, and for those that can't, we have to provide clues to drivers and users that people are looking to cross. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. One of the other criticisms that we have sometimes heard about this is, well, you know, a roundabout can only handle cars. And what about a fire truck? And what about a school bus? Or what about something that we've come up with quite a bit in the last little while? What about large farm vehicles? And we were doing a project for Region Durham on Taunton Road, and there's 3 or 4 new roundabouts being proposed there. And that was a big concern of the farming community is, you know, we have these extra large vehicles, and so how are we going to get through? So we have designed our roundabouts at the concept level to make sure that all of those vehicles can safely navigate through that. And the way they do that is normal sized vehicles use the paved roadway, Oversized vehicles track onto what we call the truck apron. So this is still a paved surface, usually different colored asphalt, but the vehicle tracks over. You can see how this double trailer is tracking on that, but it's still it can make all the moves very safely. The other thing we can't forget about when we do that is to make sure that we put the signs far enough back that one of these big guys, when they go through, don't knock them all down. So that's something that we make sure we do as well.
I'm just noticing that I think you have our version of the July presentation.
Oh, so you're going to flip back. You're going to give me the new version.
I'm going to take over
All
and
right.
allow you to talk about the accessibility that we've added.
All right, so I'm going to stop sharing there, and you're going to give me the new version. So this is something that we have added since the last time, and we did hear from some visually impaired people about, okay, what about me? How do I get through something like this? So the crosswalks. So confident cyclists. Well, let's talk about cyclists first. A commuter cyclist will ride through the roundabout with the vehicles. Others that don't feel so confident doing that can get off their bikes and act like a pedestrian through the roundabout. So now flipping over to how pedestrians occupy it. So the crosswalks are set back to give it the to make it very easy for the pedestrian or the cyclist that's acting as pedestrian to see vehicles and vice versa. And for visually impaired, they can actually distinguish the difference between a car and an approaching roundabout, so they know when it's safe to enter. There's also some, and I think the next slide may show some other features that actually really help, and all these will be available, so you can read all the details later. But they do provide a little bit of separation from they're not right at the roundabout, so they are set back a little way so that vehicles and people can see each other. It helps people who are visually impaired, they can hear the noise. They're getting their clues from something other than seeing. These tactile surfaces allow them to realize that they're coming to a crossing. They're not on a sidewalk any longer. And the median here provides a refuge. So people are only crossing one lane of traffic at a time. And that's a real benefit to something compared to a signalized intersection where you were crossing multiple lanes at the same time. Other features that can be, and that's actually our traffic engineer, Vanessa, who's probably much more qualified to talk about this than I am, but nevertheless, I'll do it. There are other things that we are proposing to add to really help with that, and this is a on-demand signal, pedestrian signal crossing. So you push the button when you want to cross, the lights activate. It tells drivers that there's a pedestrian waiting to cross, and then the vehicle has to yield to, as they do at a regular intersection, to the person crossing. For those, we will also have auditory signals, so something that they can hear, that they're aware that the signals have been activated as well. And I talked about that. Okay, natural environment is obviously something that was a big thing during the EA, and it continues to be during the design. So trees and landscaping vegetation, there will be some landscape vegetation that'll have to be removed during construction. But as I mentioned earlier, we have a landscape architect on board to enhance the landscape when we're finished. It is normal practice to make sure that the trees and vegetation are only removed during appropriate times of the year, so it doesn't affect breeding birds. Chimney swifts, and there's various species of at-risk bats. If they're identified and really they haven't been to any great degree in this area, there'll be targeted surveys that will be completed at certain times a year. These are very time sensitive to ensure that any species at risk that's identified is appropriately managed. And of course, fish and vegetation within the Trent River. It's with proper mitigation, there's a couple of things. First of all, there's the construction impact itself, where we're in the water building piers, and that's very tightly controlled. The Trent River in this area has mostly a rock bottom, so there isn't a lot of sediment around, so that's beneficial for us. but the areas around the construction zone within the water will be contained. So any silt that is churned up by the construction operations will be contained. And I did mention earlier, we have the opportunity with that pathway that we're constructing or proposing on the west side to actually create some additional fish habitat and some breeding habitat as well. So that's a benefit as well. Archaeology, the area is for the most part built up, so there isn't a lot of archaeological potential. There are a couple of areas that are being investigated now during what we call the stage 2. And the stage 2 is digging test pits to see whether areas that were identified as stage 1 that had some potential, whether there's actually there. You may or may not have witnessed some of that work. There isn't big bells and whistles going on with it. It's people with shovels digging small test pits. So that'll be completed by this year. And I mentioned earlier that there is an area in the Trent River, potentially in the crossing area, where we may need to do an underwater archaeological assessment as well. Cultural heritage, designing with the Trent River. So we are very conscious of the heritage value of Campbellford, and the new bridge is not going to be an ugly 401 type functional bridge. It is going to be very sensitive to the colors and natural heritage of the area, using materials that blend in, using design features that are sleek, that are very attractive. We want to collectively walk away with something that everyone is very proud of. There are a number of heritage properties in the area of the construction. There's a couple of homes that definitely have to be removed at 120 Grand and 109 Saskatoon. And I mentioned that's the area where the potential parkette could be put in. And there are a couple of other homes that are going to have some impacts, and we're working towards that right now. And there are additional 42 properties of significance along the road improvements, but not directly impacted by any of the work. Construction, there's two types of noise. There's construction noise that ends at the end of the construction, and then there's the noise from vehicles. When we do our noise assessments, the first row of homes along the corridor is considered to be potential noise sensitive areas, and they are the ones that are studied to check to see what the change in noise levels is going to be based on the projected changes in traffic volumes. And the study has been done, and I'm not sure if it's available on the website yet, Katrina, but if not, it will be. And it shows that the noise changes are expected to be well within the provincial guidelines. So there isn't really any requirements for noise mitigation. During construction, I know those times look very early, 6 a.m. to 9 for construction noise. That could change during the course of design and through tendering. That's within the control of the local municipality with their noise bylaw, what they allow. There's also in construction a protocol that if people are unhappy with what they're seeing, there'll be an on-site person that they can talk to and have their concerns heard and addressed. And then normal stuff like maintaining your construction equipment so it has proper muffling and whatnot, and limiting your operating time within daylight periods and that kind of stuff. If required, temporary noise barriers may be installed. That's pretty rare to use something like that. And it's important also to select appropriate routing for construction traffic to keep them away from sensitive areas. So only allow them, to and from the site in certain manners. Next. So next steps, feedback. We, as Denise mentioned earlier, and Katrina as well, we've approached what we call the 30% design. The next step is to take the comments that we've received and address them, and then move on towards what would be the 60% design. The design is expected to be completed in 2021. That will allow utility relocations, property purchases, things like that to occur. And then I'm sure a lot of you have questions about schedule of construction, and I usually defer those to Denise. At this point, I think it's safe to say that it isn't yet scheduled for construction. There's funding that needs to be in place prior to that happening, and Denise can address that more in the Q&A if anyone wants to hear further about that.